All right. The beast is back talking. Gary Russell Jr. Oh, man, he lays into Gervonta Tank Davis and tells people to boycott Gervonta Davis versus Leo Santa Cruz because everybody knows that ain't the fight that Gervonta Davis should be having. He should be having a fight with the best 126-pounder on the planet, being Gary Russell Jr. And he lays into Gervonta. Man, I'm loving Gary Russell Jr. right now, man. He is mixing stuff up. Let's talk about the latest hot topic coming out of the mouth of Gary Russell Jr. in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. So, I know there's going to be a lot of people that disagree with me about this, and that is fine. Leave your comments in the comment section. I'm okay with that. All right, this is a fan page. I'm giving you my opinion. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we don't agree. But this particular time, dog, being the huge fan that I am of Gervonta Tank Davis, huge fan that I am of Devin Haney, big fan that I am of Terrence Crawford, Gary Russell Jr. making all y'all look bad, okay? Gary Russell Jr. is making all of you look bad. He's making Terrence Crawford look terrible. He's making Devin Haney look bad. And Gervonta Tank Davis. In this video, we're going to talk on the Gervonta Tank Davis part of it, though. So, Gary Russell Jr. is the 126-pound champion, WBC 126-pound champion. Only loss that he has had is against a guy that many people have is the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world, Vasily Lomachenko. Since that fight that took place 6 years ago, Gary Russell Jr. is undefeated. He is the longest reigning champion in a legitimate weight division in all of boxing. And again, I said he is the longest reigning champion in a legitimate weight division in boxing. The minimum weight, little flyweight, is minimum weight. That 105-pound belt that Midlothian holds is a domestic Thailand belt. So I don't want to hear that garbage because ain't nobody going over there to fight, and there's only a certain amount of people that little in the world. If you go to BoxRec and you look at how many fighters there are in the world that are that size, and you will notice that the pool is somewhere around 100 of them. Okay, there might be 20 of them that are legitimate for real pros at that weight. So no, Gary Russell Jr. at 126 pounds with fellow champions like Shakur Stevenson, Josh Warrington, Leo Santa Cruz, and all the other guys that came through that is in a legitimate weight class. Gary Russell Jr. says, and he said this 6 months ago, that if he was not able to get the Leo Santa Cruz fight, that he was going to go to lightweight and fight at lightweight. So he said this well before Gervonta Tank Davis decided to fight for a lightweight title. He said this before Devin Haney won the right around the time that Devin Haney won the WBC belt. And so, but I guess that's for the Devin Haney conversation. We'll stick with the Gervonta Davis. So, Gary Russell Jr. says about Gervonta Davis, because Gervonta responds to Gervonta Davis because, you know, people ask Gervonta about Gary Russell, and Gervonta says, oh, he's too small, right? He's too small and he doesn't sell. He's too small and he doesn't sell. And Gary Russell Jr. is responding to that beautifully. First of all, the fact that he's too small is nonsense. Okay, I'm a huge Gervonta Davis fight dude, but you fought Jesus Cuellar. Okay, you fought Jesus Cuellar at 130 pounds, and Jesus Cuellar used to fight at 126 pounds. Okay, when Gary, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but the fights that took place, a couple of those fights that took place at 130 pounds were against guys that had won championships at 130 pounds, at 126 pounds, the same weight class that Gary Russell Jr. fights in. Gervonta Tank Davis's next fight is at 130 pounds against Leo Santa Cruz, which is just 4 pounds away from where Gary Russell Jr. is the champion. So the idea that Gervonta Davis saying that Gary Russell Jr. is too small to fight him is nonsense, because he's already fighting guys that are fighting in the same weight class as Gary Russell Jr., including his next fight against Leo Santa Cruz, who right now is the WBA featherweight champion. Right now, as we speak, Gary Russell Jr. is fighting a guy who holds a title in the same weight class as Gary Russell Jr. So how can Gary Russell Jr. be too small for a fight with Gervonta Tank Davis? No. Gervonta Tank, and let's add to it. One of the people who are a champion in the same weight division as Gary Russell Jr., as Leo Santa Cruz and Gervonta Tank Davis are fighting right now, is a guy named Jojo Diaz, right? Jojo Diaz is the IBF 130-pound champion. And Gervonta Davis is fighting Leo Santa Cruz at 130 pounds. Jojo Diaz just got beat by Gary Russell Jr. at 126 pounds, and Gary Russell Jr. beat him easy. If Gary Russell Jr. goes to 130 pounds, he's going to beat Jojo Diaz easily. So how in the world can you fight a guy, Leo Santa Cruz, who holds a belt in the same weight class as Gary Russell Jr. and you're fighting at a weight class 130 where another champion at 130 has already been beaten by Gary Russell Jr. and really easily too. How can he be too small? That doesn't make sense. Nah, man. No go on that one. No go on that Gervonta Davis. Man, I got a bug flying around. Little gnat. Anyway, no go on that. So let's look at the other one, right? So he said he's too small and he says he doesn't sell. Well, that's ridiculous, okay? Because first of all, you fought Yuriorkis Gamboa in Atlanta and sold out in Atlanta with Yuriorkis Gamboa. Why would you believe that Yuriorkis Gamboa sells more tickets than Gary Russell Jr.? Where's the proof of that? He's beatable, right? He's beatable. Yuriorkis Gamboa is beatable, but Yuriorkis Gamboa is not some huge draw. He's a guy that was beat by Robinson Castellano. So why would you think that it's okay to fight Yuriorkis Gamboa, but you can't fight Gary Russell Jr.? Nah, man, it don't make sense. And especially because you're from Baltimore and he's from DC. If you made the fight, now I know that the fight is that you may not be able to have crowds at the fight, right? But even if you don't have crowds at the fight and it's a fight that's on pay-per-view, you're gonna sell huge in DC, you're gonna sell huge in Baltimore. You're gonna make, man, please, that fight could be as big as the Leo Santa Cruz fight. But you gave Leo Santa Cruz the fight. Where's the proof that Leo Santa Cruz is some gigantic draw? Oh, he's Mexican, right? The Floyd Mayweather Jr. blueprint. That's all that is, man. So, nah, dude, I can't ride with Gervonta Tank Davis on this at all, man. And so he's making you guys look bad. Now, Gary Russell Jr. is a great fighter, too. He's a great fighter. And he's not that much smaller than Tank, man. He's not that much smaller than Tank. But let's get this right. There's a lot more people getting added to the don't want no smoke with Gary Russell Jr. List. Okay, it used to be just guys like Josh Warrington and Leo Santa Cruz, right? Those were the obvious ones that ain't trying to get no smoke with them. Shakur Stevenson passed through there like a fart in the wind and didn't fight Gary Russell Jr. But I'll assume that's because he's being developed. So I want to kind of give him a little bit of a break. But nah, dude. If you don't want, you can't give those type of reasons for not fighting Gary Russell Jr. Gary Russell Jr. versus Gervonta Tank Davis is just a difficult fight. Gary Russell Jr. is going to be a difficult fight for everybody. Like everybody keeps saying, oh, he's just going to roll over and beat. Like everybody's just going to roll over Gary Russell Jr. Dude, Gary Russell Jr. is as skilled a fighter as any of these guys that we're mentioning, man. He's as skilled as anybody. The only issue is whether or not he's big enough. But seeing as Gervonta Davis is already fighting guys the same size, basically the same size as Gary Russell, what difference does it make? So as they say in DC, nah, shawty. I'm not buying it, man. You guys out here looking bad, man. You guys are out here looking bad. Now, there's another video that I'm gonna do because, dude, Devin, nah, man, I see people trying to support Devin on this, and I think Devin Haney's a great fighter. But no, man, no. If you said you got $1.5 million for him, you ain't Terrence Crawford, man. You ain't Terrence Crawford, dude. So if he says 2, that ain't ducking. Okay? He said, nah, man, I'll do it for 2. Ain't nothing wrong with that. Ain't nothing wrong. If Gary Russell Jr. walked up and said to Devin Haney, hey, man, I'll take $2 million. I'll take $2 million to fight you. That would be a fair deal, dog. So I don't want people, we'll get into it in another video, dog, but don't y'all try to hide behind this. Well, he said 1.5, and if he doesn't do it for exactly 1.5, he's really ducking. Nah, man. If Devin wants to fight and DAZN wants to fight and Gary says, nah, man, 2 million, dude, offer him the 2 million, man. Offer him the 2 million. Because that is a reasonable, fair amount of money for a fight with Gary Russell Jr. And you know, when Gary Russell Jr. said the 1.5, he would take the 1.5 for Terrence Crawford, that's because it was Terrence Crawford and that 1.5 was thrown out there with Kell Brook. Okay? But people trying to don't try to piggyback on the call out, man. Don't try to piggyback on the callback, dog, and look like you the hard one. No. Gary Russell Jr. is putting y'all's name in the street. And that's all that is. Let's talk about that. But let me know in the video what you think about it, and no problem debating back and forth about it. This is just a lovely conversation and a fun conversation, and I like to have fun in the conversation, fun in the comment section talking about it. You guys let me know what you think. Like, comment, and subscribe. If you're not, if you are subscribed, hey, make sure that you hit that bell icon and you hit all so you can get all notifications. Also, thank you so much for everybody that supports in the Patreon and the channel members and in the live streams for the with the super chats for the live streams that we do. Thank you guys so much. And with that, I'm out. Peace.